Hello. This is about the first chapter. I apologize being tardy with this. I had to redo it. The first chapter is very important in the textbook because it gives you an examples of the complexity of working with ESL kids, English language learners, as we term them. It throws a lot of terms around. And I've been reading some of your responses, chapter 1. You seem to have a good grasp of that. So I'm going to have some introductory comments, and then I'm going to probably do some other videos dealing more with the sheltered aspect. They talk about teaching learners and English learners with diverse abilities. And you can see what the issue here is. Essentially is what we're dealing with is students that come to us with all kinds of proficiency in English or none, and who may not also be very proficient in their own native language, or due to exposure or to other languages may not actually be fluent in any particular language or dedicated to one. They may just be in between, which I think is kind of a scary twilight zone. I really believe you need to have a native language, you know, for your mental processes when you're thinking to yourself. And then, of course, you want to gain fluency in other languages. It gives the example of Raul here, and the one before, though, Nico, is the one that he is perfectly balanced. Sometimes people make the mistake, oh, he's from Guatemala, or he's from Poland. I think he needs English second language. He has an accent. Accents don't count. Remember that. And you need to determine the academic background of the student, how much he's achieved or she has achieved, and if they read fluently in their native language and read well, then you have a student that is going to be successful. It may take them a while, they may have to make adjustments, but people that already have the sound basis of reading and also are developmentally, at least at the right, age level, they have the language development, they should be okay. They shouldn't need as much monitoring or assistance. That's a general statement. There are exceptions to all of these. Now, the three they talk about in here, and I kind of made a little chart, 4 squares, and you've got low-level ability, high-level ability in language, and over here you have poor academic skills or poor academic background, and sorry, a little better, and high academic ability. And essentially, the gentleman, Nico, he's up in this corner. He's high in language ability in English and high in academic ability in his native language, and maybe in English. He's going to be fine. These three are the ones we worry about. And let's talk about each of those, because I think this is where a lot of confusion comes out. Okay, Three Stooges audio figures. Anyhow, I hope you're hearing me okay. Okay, so we got 3 people we were talking about. Luisa says Raul, we'll start with him. He is a grade level academic ability in his native language, but speaks little English. He is shy and he has good behavior. He's a good citizen. He behaves well. Well, he's going to be one that's high in academics, but low in language. So he would be over here on this corner. I think that would be. No, I'd be over here. He doesn't have the language, but he has ability. So you have a student that has the academic background, but is behind in English. I go with Krashen on this. I believe that you have to allow time for the language skills, the BICS and along with the CALPS to develop. As he has more you want to provide a lot of social interaction. You want the student to have to be accepted in the classroom. You want this for all students, but I'm talking particularly for the language skills. So you don't want a student that stays off to himself, is isolated or so shy, doesn't interact, because his language skills will always be very slow in developing. So Raul he has the academics to succeed, but he's going to be hamstrung by his conversational English until he develops that skill. I've seen a lot of students who are academically strong, and I know of some of my own students that didn't speak English significantly until 8th grade, but they were very successful and got college degrees and went on for master's degrees. They had all the skills, they studied, excellent behavior, they were leaders in their community. In fact, one of them was a president of the student council in Lexington. It's been many years ago, but I was always confident they would succeed. And actually ironically, their father refused ESL classes for them. He felt that would be detrimental to their standing. Maybe a little more social status there. I wasn't sure, but he forced them to sink or swim, and they did swim because they had strong academic skills, but they really struggled for a long time, and teachers had to spend a great deal of time helping them. Look for these students. And don't ever abandon them. Don't abandon any students, but sometimes students that have the academic background, they simply, if they don't have the interaction with people, you need to work on that. You can't just teach your subject. Okay, the second one, Agnesa, adopted from an orphanage. She had limited skills. Her English isn't very good, and her academic background is pretty, I think, limited too. So she is suffering in that she is not able to be engaged or engage in these classes. So she has a lot of other issues, which you'll find with students. Sociological problems, could be difficult home life. It could be their family's very mobile. They spend a lot of time moving around. A big thing for these students is stability and friendships and trust in the teacher, because learning does not take place until, and we have that term, the affective filter, which is the emotional filter. I call it more of a force field. You screen out people. When you're fearful or anxious, you tend not to listen to people and you tend to stay back. And that inhibits all forms of learning, but particularly language learning, because you're not interacting with people. You can't stay in the corner, and so you've got to help those students. And they mention in here in this example that she has been caught stealing and had some negative behavior. She needs a lot of nurturing. So that the first thing, and I can't overemphasize this, is you have to look at the person before you look at the subject. Because a lot of language learning takes place once the individual is confident and is no longer anxious about it and opens up and drops the affective filter. That's affective, AFFECTIVE. It's part of the language learning terminology. It deals with people blocking. And we do it too. When you go to a Spanish class and you haven't had it in a long time, say you start Spanish in college and you had 2 years in high school and you haven't had it for 2 years, then you say, well, I had 2 years in high school, I can go to intermediate in college. And you go to intermediate class and find out, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's going on. You actually begin to block because it's all this noise to you. If it's like encountering a very difficult subject that you feel you have no chance to master. It could have been algebra for you. For me, it was German. I just felt like I was overwhelmed, and I just surrendered and went into my little shelter and tried to stay away from it. So a girl like Louisa needs a lot of interaction, and I don't want, and I wouldn't, it says something about stealing stuff. I think if you develop the attitude that this person is a problem, they'll perceive themselves as a problem and believe that you believe that that's the way it's always going to be. That's the mask they're going to wear. I like that little metaphor. We see people in a certain way, stereotype them, or we wear a mask in dealing with them, and they wear a mask in dealing with us. And so then those things become hardened, and the attitudes are never changed. Okay, now Louisa is interesting. She, and I've seen this quite interesting, and much more common, is you have students that have been in the United States a long time, and they really don't know how to write in their own language. And that is sad, because developmentally it would be so much easier if students were academically strong in their language and then move their reading and writing skills over to English. Reading is reading. A little sidelight for you here. Reading in any language is good. If a student's parents have books in Spanish or Russian or Japanese, and they read at home to their child in that language, encourage that. I've seen cases where people would try to throw out everything in Spanish so they can purify themselves for English, and that is not natural. This is not a conversion. You're not having to throw out pagan gods and take on another one, okay? So this Louisa is going to be at risk for dropping out, and it's going to be because she is socially popular, but students like this, if possible, you would like them to take heritage language classes. So they actually study Spanish as a Spanish speaker. And those classes are less on, they're more about reading and writing and exploring the academic use of Spanish, as opposed to our Spanish classes for Americans when we go in and we don't speak Spanish and we just try to learn hola, ¿cómo está? Learn basic Spanish, conversational and stuff. We don't have essay writing right off the bat. Students in Spanish, heritage Spanish, would actually be writing small sentences, and they'd be working on their grammar and writing their spelling. It's actually rather sad, because you see someone who speaks Spanish well, and then when they write, it's like an old situation where a person just sounds out the words, and the spelling is atrocious. Okay, now I'm going to call it time out here for a second. There's an illustration on page 4 in your textbook, and it has conversational language and academic proficiency and school experience on, and it has a continuum going from the bottom to the top. And you can see on the left side levels of language development. And the key here is to realize that even someone starts in 8th grade, I'm not talking kindergarten here, but let's say they do speak in their own language and they're learning English, they're going to start out with a period of, they call it a silent period. This is, you have to listen for a significant amount of time. We'd like to speed it up, but the fact is, as a baby, you get 2 years just to listen to all the noise in the house and language and expressions and nonverbals. And you see how people act when they say your name, and then you say, oh, it's my name. You don't even know to say that. You just respond to the name as a child does to a mother or father. So there's a long listening period. You can't escape this. Students will not begin reacting on the first day or even the first month. Give them space. I do believe in teaching specific language that's needed for basic functions, like, this is when school begins. Keep it simple, though. If you're starting with a student who has no English at all, okay? Now, cognitively, they know the concept of, classes begin at 9 and end at 3:30. You have your parents pick you up after school, or else you take the bus, and someone may have to translate that, and you're going to need translators. You're going to need, it's better for translators to have a professional person or someone, a para employed, that can help with that. It doesn't have to be a certified translator. We're not talking a court case, but you should avoid using kids their own age to be their translators if there is some conflicts possible. In other words, if a child is punished and you need to explain this in Spanish, don't get their best buddy in there and involve them at it, or someone that is not mature enough that they won't use that information or play games with it. Because if you don't understand Spanish, and I mainly speak of Spanish because there are other languages, you want a mature adult or a para or an older person. One of the phenomena that's kind of negative is you get a lot of kids that are employed by their parents to translate when they go to the bank. A sixth grader who speaks English pretty well cannot explain loan provisions. They conceptually don't understand what the banker's talking about. So having the child explain it is very iffy. That's why banks, if they have clientele that don't speak a language, they should have someone on staff, which of course in a lot of towns it's common for Spanish. I have to say that for languages outside of Spanish, when it talks in here about dual language and bilingual and stuff like that, you really don't have many of those programs. There are dual language Chinese English programs, and just a brief about that. That's when the language is taught half and half. So half of the day you use English and half the day you use, say, Chinese. There are programs like that in Denver. They actually have a school that has 2 dual programs. One side is Spanish English. The other side is Chinese English. Okay, so that those students, when they go through, will speak fluent Chinese and fluent English. So American students in the school, and even Chinese students who go there, will learn both languages and expectations in writing in both languages. That's a real stellar type program. A lot of people want to be in those, but they're very rare. And you know why they're rare? Because where are you going to find a qualified teacher who speaks Chinese and English, or for that matter, even to find a para? Finding a para that speaks Spanish is possible. Even if there's a large enough population, you can recruit a para, but they're not teachers, they're assistants. And you have to keep that in mind. Don't ever make your para the teacher of the class. That happens still, obviously. It's convenient and cheap, but it's not right. Now, conversational language, you look on that chart on page 4, and you see how it goes up, all the way up to philosophical and religious political conversations, which obviously you would not have in elementary or preschool for the most part. You could have those in secondary. But you want to deal with middle schoolers or upper elementary. You want to challenge them cognitively, but not, give them little children's books to look at. They don't want to be treated like babies. Kids want to be respected. So what you do is you look for high interest, lower level reading books. And most of you should know about those, but I have a lot of them. I don't have so many right here. I have a whole bunch in the back room. But they're books that have a limited vocabulary. Let's say they're limited to 1,000 basic words. It sounds like a lot, but it's not for purposes of reading. But you have and the ones they don't know, they can look up. It's not like they have to look up every other word, okay? I remember reading a novel, Maria, from Colombia. It was named Maria, from 1800s. And it was all about jungle and romance. And I remember reading that book. It's the original, of course. And I had to look up a vocabulary word every minute. And so reading that was a nightmare because it was so rich and it was raw. and an abridged version, with limited. If you can find books like that, it's good. I like books that have limited vocabulary. They're not the best in the long run, but for learning, you need to make it, the material has to be comprehensible before it can be anything else. I think I mentioned that in another video or the other audio. I talked about language development. But you got to have comprehensible. So you want to challenge them, but you don't want to have too much of a challenge. Okay? So, and you can see on academic proficiency on this, on page 4, you got school skills, beginning reading. These are all the academic skills. And if you get someone who has very good conversational English, they probably at some point will only go to a certain point, because academic English is always much more challenging than conversational English. And you'll see it when you get down, when you even get down to the point on the right side, you talk about beginning reading and writing and comprehension, vocabulary knowledge, recognition of words. That's where the scaffolding goes in. That's where you have to differentiate instruction. Differentiation, if it's done correctly, and I've got tapes on this, so I've got some really good examples. Differentiation should not be academically dumbing down the material, but instead showing new ways to teach the concept, but not rely, go through and somewhat make the comprehensible, the vocabulary comprehensible, okay? All right. Another thing they mention in these on the next few pages, they talk about types of programs and assessment. Now, assessment, I'm going to have you read this. You should be able to look at the videos on here. If you don't have that code, let me know, because there are places you can watch the videos. I actually have a text. I don't have the e-text, but there are sites there. And if you have a problem with that, I'll get on with the book dealer. Assessment is very difficult because it's easy to determine a person doesn't know much English and at what level they might be. And that's where you have on page, I think where it is, there's a page in there where they have the Solon index, if I can find it. It's kind of a quick and dirty way of figuring out what kids know. It's on page 15. And as you go across, it just simply says, they're a 1 if they cannot understand even a simple conversation. They understand nothing, they're a 1. Now, what gets complicated is 3 and 4 usually. That area gets much more complicated. If you slow down and they understand most of what is said at a slower speed, then you give them a 3. If they understand everything, it's a 5. The real complication is in the 2 to 4 area. But I like this because this is a student oral observation matrix. And a regular teacher can kind of look on this and do an assessment. You don't have to be a test specialist or wait for scoring to come in from somebody. And so this will give you an idea, quick and dirty, or not so dirty, but I mean just quick, but limited to conversational. This will help you kind of come up with some ideas of where that student is. And I do want to mention again, accents are not up to be penalized. Some of the most famous people in the world that are perfectly understandable have strong accents. I remember Henry Kissinger, Arnold, the Terminator, I'll be back. You know what he said. They also mention on this page 14, the iceberg. And this, if you know the iceberg, and other than the Titanic, obviously you know the Titanic in 1912. The conversational language is what you see on the surface. And if you probe on that, you'll find there are places that are hidden, that are below, where they may have skills or not have skills below the surface. But the real telling point is academic language. Now, I'm going to give you a quick and easy way to determine some academic skills. This only works for either really good students or students that have little English, but it does help you. It gives you a chance to look. As you have students write an essay, my favorite place in the world, or this is a good one, have them write the essay about the culture map, because it gives them visuals and they have something to hang on to. So let them write about their culture map and describe it. And first time through, you don't want to scaffold it. You just want to see what they can do without any help. And you have them write down. And so, by the way, I ran all your culture maps off. They're really cool. I love these. And my other class is doing them too. I'll be going over those on Monday, and I'll probably do a podcast, or I think I'll do a video because then I can share them, you know. But what's interesting is the culture maps give them something to hang on to that's tangible so they can write about it. You can determine very quickly if they know, like, I like to go to the swimming pool. And you might find that in Spanish, I like go to instead of I like to go to. So it tells you the student doesn't know the infinitive or doesn't know how to put I want to do something, that to in there. And that will tell you immediately that they probably may not have that in conversational English. That's a transfer from Spanish. Yeah, in Spanish you say, me gusta nadar en la piscina. I like to swim in the pool. But in Spanish, the construction me gusta, it is pleasing to me, is what that actually means if you translate it. And me gusta nadar, there's no to there. There's no often. The a is like a to, but it doesn't exist there. That's why prepositions and two-part word phrases and things like that get all screwed up. But you look beyond that, and you look for does this student, do they have concepts they're trying to get across to you? This is something that's pretty experimental. I've not seen anything that actually looks deeply at writing. I mean, it's easy to see grammar errors, but to see conceptual errors. And I've seen this with college students. Well, obviously, were very brilliant, but their English wasn't very good. But they could describe things like economic theory, and they could talk about it. And you understood what they were going for. You just knew that the grammar wasn't very good. Well, so you got that, and then you got this little skill thing here. We used to use this at Lexington. We put this on a folder. So a teacher could actually have a folder for the student. Of course, now you'd have electronic files. But you could actually go through and do a little quiz with them. You know, talk to them a few minutes and then make your judgment here. You're not going to be too far off. You're not going to be too far off. Now, you want somebody who works with the students to do this. You don't want to just say, I want to get somebody who doesn't know anything about ESL or isn't particularly empathetic and have them do it. That's not very good. So you've got the iceberg on the left side and that I just mentioned, and that tells you there's a lot you don't know about your student. And you're not going to be able to get that iceberg out of the water because there's certain rules about floating. And so as there are physics for an iceberg, people, their personality, their background, they kind of keep that protected. I mentioned that affective filter. People are kind of standoffish. They're watching. That's normal. That's our species. Is what we do. And you go someplace and you don't understand it. Your first movement, your first behavior is to listen and just try to make yourself small and pay attention. Engage in, and of course, if you don't understand what's going on, you spend a lot of time looking at people's eyes, their faces, and if you're not in a very positive attitude, you get kind of paranoid and you think people are after you or something. That's not good. Okay. They give several levels in here, and I hope you read these with great detail. They have this is always complicated, And when you're setting up an ESL program, and some of you have this class may indeed end up doing this, this book is great for this. It's kind of a quick way to give you some ideas. They have on page 17, entering level 1. I need a little more light for my reading. Level 1, lowest level, essentially no English proficiency. And you can see it goes through all the way to bridging to level 6 at close or grade level proficiency. Now, some things that I need to tell you about levels is that most of the time you cannot afford to have 4 to 5 to 6 levels because you don't have the personnel for it. Therefore, you differentiate and you try to put kids in situations where they can be successful. I kind of like, since I'm in a baseball mode, I've been on a baseball mode for a while. I look at it a little bit like this. I study the New York Yankees. They're not winning today. But the deal with the Yankees is they have to develop players. They get players with raw abilities. And ironically, they have to learn English. That's one of the big things. There's been some not formal study, but that the success of baseball players has a lot to do with their embrace of English so that they can function better in the United States. If they become a big star and they don't speak English, you know, it can lead to some negative things. People are negative about them. But you look at this, it's like a farm system. Lowest level, you have a student. Now, of course, you're not looking for stars. You're just looking to help all the students you get. You start at the lowest level. You may have to combine your beginning or newcomer levels, first and second. Sometimes they have a thing called newcomer level, and it exists because students need to know how the school functions. You may have to teach kids how to use the bathroom properly. You know, bathrooms vary all over the world. I won't go into it, but if you've traveled a lot, you know they're not all the same. How to wash hands, the importance of hand washing, how to behave, keep your hands to yourself, how to treat members, kids are older than you, younger than you, show respect for older. There's some cultures that do not automatically give a lot of respect to female teachers because maybe they've had only male teachers and they may be disrespectful. I don't ever frame these as a deficiency in the culture. It's just different. See, anytime you start condemning, then you got a problem. Okay, there are a lot of things I don't like about other cultures. I personally would not want to live there, and I would not go along with it. But I'm not in a position to change that or force it. So you have to look at the student in many dimensions. You got to look at their academics, their behavior, and newcomer, of course, deals a lot with behavior and expectations. And as you do this, I'm trying to stuff a lot into this course, but you have to also deal with the parents. And that is very important, dealing with the parents. And you can never have anytime you get a teacher who says, hey, I teach geometry or I teach social studies, I don't do community stuff. Well, I'm sorry, but you are a community paid employee. And besides, to do the decent thing and the proper thing is to care about the parents and the student. Okay, that means that can get into very serious advocacy issues. What if their heat's turned off and their landlord's cheating them? I've heard, you know, people renting apartments to international students who are in schools, not just international students. They usually know better, but in college, but actually in high school and elementary, and they were charging the parents, they were charging the families for parking on the public street. Like, if you park your car out in a public street, I'm going to charge you so much for that space. And that was a complete ripoff. Okay. It's amazing what people do to cheat or not providing repairs. I can go on in a litany of situations I've run into. So the thing is with the levels, you may only have 2 levels, and you may have a newcomer, a quick 1 or 2 weeks to get the student into the school. Establishing a relationship between the para and a teacher or teachers with the student is integral to getting the students to adapt and to learn in this situation. I'm not going to spend time on the details of how a multi-leveled ESL program could function. That's not the purpose of this class. It can be multi-leveled, and if you are in a large school and you have the resources, of course you should do that. That means certain types of readers for ESL material, and it's got different levels, and page 18 talks about those. That's not something that I'm going to spend a lot of time on. Okay, I'm going to make this a 2-part video. I don't want this to go too long.